But first, the Cincinnati Bengals just made a colossal mistake, a massive error of epic proportion. According first to Jordan Schultz and then confirmed by Adam Schefter in the wee hours of the morning, the Cincinnati Bengals have signed both T. Higgins and Jamar Chase simultaneously, I guess, to separate contracts of their own. So T. Higgins signed a 4-year, $115 million contract. Jamar Chase signed a 4-year, $161 million contract. He surpasses Myles Garrett, who briefly was the highest paid non-quarterback of all time, actually, in terms of average annual salary. So Jamar Chase gets his bag, well-deserved. T. Higgins gets his bag, well-deserved. The problem is for the Cincinnati Bengals, Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, they take up 44% of the cap. Now, we don't know what the cap is. Joe Burrow, I looked at his Spock rack. Joe Burrow is going to take up about $46 million in terms of the salary cap for the Bengals. Not exactly sure how it's going to shake out for Chase and Higgins. I talked about this 2 weeks ago when Higgins got franchise tagged. I said, I don't know if the Bengals are doing this to try and move him. I'm not sure what the objective is here, but this could end up being really bad, and I figured this could be the potential outcome. Is that you have a Joe Burrow who's, listen, that's one of those guys, I don't care about injury history. I don't care about any of that. This is the Cincinnati Bengals we're talking about. You give Joe Burrow his money. That is a consensus. You don't even think twice. Top 4 quarterback in the NFL. There are many who would argue he's number 2, and you can make that case. He is that special. No question about it. Jamar Chase, you can make the case he's the best receiver in the NFL today. I would take his former LSU teammate, Justin Jefferson. I've said that for a few years now. I think Jefferson is in a league of his own, but Jamar Chase is nothing short of spectacular. And T. Higgins, for the record, probably the best number 2 receiver in the league. I like Devontae Smith in Philly, but you can make that case for T. Higgins. Here's the problem. All 3 of these guys, special players in their own right, were outstanding last year. We can show you the numbers on what they did. Do we have the graphic? Here it is. We can show you the numbers. Joe Burrow, these are their career highs, by the way. This is probably the best season all 3 of these guys have ever had. Joe Burrow had a career high in completions, completion percentage, pass yards, pass touchdowns, and passer rating. Jamar Chase, I don't know, won the Triple Crown. Had the most catches in the NFL and obviously of his career, most catches in his career, most receiving yards in his career, most receiving touchdowns in his career. And T. Higgins himself had the most receiving touchdowns in his career. But you see the right side of that graphic for the podcast audience listening. It says, and what did that get them? Well, we can show you 9-8, 3rd in the AFC North, behind my Steelers. Yikes. And they missed the playoffs. And the Bengals saw what happened in the 2024 season, and they said, you know what? We're just going to double down on that. Listen, you paid Joe Burrow. You paid Jamar Chase. A lot of teams, rightfully so, would pay T. Higgins. What are the Bengals going to do now that they have essentially half their salary cap in 3 guys who were awesome last year, from start to finish, amazing, and they missed the playoffs? Why did they miss the playoffs? Well, because according to Pro Football Focus, they had one of the 5 worst offensive lines of the league. They were 26th in terms of points per game allowed, 25th in terms of yards per game allowed. They're bad in the margins. They're bad really in the areas that outside of quarterback, you kind of have to be great at in order to be a Super Bowl contender. Up front on both ends, on both sides of the ball, particularly in the offensive line, which the Bengals have botched since even before Joe Burrow got there. I remember when he first got drafted by the Bengals in 2020. That was when my show was only audio. That was during COVID. I don't even remember what I talked about during those shows. It was like draft and last dance. Who knows? I do remember saying this, though, because I was not a Joe Burrow believer before that draft. Clearly, I was wrong, but my mindset was, okay, if he were going to a franchise that, yeah, obviously was bad enough to get the first pick, but they had the building blocks to be successful. You know, they had a solid coach, maybe a good left tackle, kind of like the Giants do to a certain degree, right? Like, I think Dable's a good coach. I think they have an outstanding left tackle. The Bengals didn't have any of those things. Zach Taylor, God bless him, seemed like a nice guy. I think he's an okay coach, but that's about all I'll give him. He's okay. He's kind of typical Cincinnati, fine. And up front, they've been horrendous ever since Joe Burrow got there. I thought it was one of the most impressive things I've ever seen a quarterback do in the NFL in my lifetime when Joe Burrow took that team to the Super Bowl in 2021. Right? Getting it through the 1-seed Titans, getting it through Mahomes and the Chiefs on the road at Arrowhead. Remember they called it Burrowhead? It was kind of silly, but they called it Burrowhead briefly. I thought it was amazing what he did with that squad. But even then, that defense was good. That defense had pass rushers. Oh, by the way, pass rushers. Trey Hendrickson may not be a Bengal, Maybe as soon as the show comes out. I don't know. We're recording it's 15 minutes past noon. The show's airing at 6 p.m. Eastern. Trey Hendrickson asked for a trade. The Bengals reportedly are trying to bring him back. I don't know how they're going to make it work, but this is a guy who led the league in sacks last year, had the same number of sacks in 2023, had 17 and a half sacks on a bad defense over the course of the season. When Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase, T. Higgins are having to get into shootouts, this guy on the other side of the ball, he was getting the job done. The rest of his teammates weren't. They moved on from the defensive coordinator, Lou Anarumo. Their secondary, because of some losses in free agency and just the fact that they haven't paid some of these guys or won't pay these guys, terrible. For the record, they're in a division, back to that O-line, where the Ravens always have a good pass rush. My Steelers have T.J. Watt, and the Browns have Myles Garrett. This is not to say that the Cincinnati Bengals won't be good. This is not to say the Bengals won't even make the playoffs next year. Heck, if you told me they win the AFC North, if you told me they edge out Baltimore, won't be shocked, because that's how great Joe Burrow is, that's how great Chase is, and T. Higgins is excellent. The problem is it is a salary cap. If it were baseball, yeah, pay him whatever. But it is a salary cap league. It's a hard cap league, is the National Football League, and you're going to have to do some serious cap finagling in order to improve in the margins, and you're going to have to draft well. And if we know the Bengals, they're not good at either. The irony of this is they actually have a notoriously cheap front office with Mike Brown in particular, the head honcho, the owner of this operation. But at the end of the day, it's not, and people are going to see this as a shot at T. Higgins. I think T. Higgins could be a number one receiver, maybe in half the league. I mean, he's excellent. But he was great last year. And so was Chase. And so was Burrow. And they were 4-8 at one point this year. Like we remember, they won that 5-game winning streak, and the Chiefs should be scary. Buffalo, watch out. Guys, they couldn't stop anybody, and they couldn't protect Burrow. And that's been the story of the Cincinnati Bengals, particularly on the offensive line, ever since Joe got there. And so people seeing this is like, good for those guys getting paid. They're worth every penny. But for the Bengals, they just closed their window of contention right now. They are not going to win the AFC next year. They are not a contender to win the AFC next year. Now, in 2026, who knows? Maybe if they hit on some draft picks. But again, the Bengals don't really do that. And if you're a potential, let's say they were to move on from Zach Taylor. Let's say the Bengals have another disappointing year, 9-8, 10-7, whatever. Maybe they go to the playoffs, knocked out in the first round, like the Steelers every year. And let's say Zach Taylor's fired. It's an attractive job. It's not like it's, Jacksonville. I mean, it's an attractive head coaching job because you have Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase. But the ownership being what the ownership is, the division being what the division is, and the fact the front office hasn't done a really good job drafting over the years. I mean, if you told me, I'm not even kidding when I say this, if you told me in the next 5 years the Tennessee Titans would have more playoff wins than the Bengals in the next 5 years, won't be shocked. Why? Cam Ward has upside. I don't love Cam Ward. I like Cam Ward. In a perfect world, I'd see him as more like the 10th overall pick, but it's a quarterback's league, as I've said since 2021. You take Cam Ward, and I like this new GM that they got from Kansas City. That's what the smart teams do. That's what Detroit did. Remember, they took Brad Holmes from a smart franchise in the LA Rams. Look at the Lions now. Look how much they've aced the draft. Maybe the Bengals do that, but I'm just telling you front end right now. It's 2025. If by 2030 we're doing this show, hopefully maybe from a network someday, and the Titans have more playoff wins than the Bengals, don't say I didn't tell you first. So it's from a salary cap perspective, it makes no sense. By the way, the Bengals didn't get better. This is what we always get mistaken with extensions or with retaining guys in free agency. Like, it's great that you kept them, but you didn't get better. You just retained the team. Joe Burrow is still great. So is Jamar Chase. So is T. Higgins. And they were last year. And it got you nothing. It got you to a 4-8 start. And for the record, 5-6 seasons ago in the NFL, they would have been the second team out of the postseason. So we can talk about, they were right on Denver's heels. Okay, cool. I mean, Denver got blitzed by Buffalo. I think Buffalo would beat Cincinnati because Cincinnati wouldn't be able to stop Buffalo. And by the way, they would have gotten to Joe Burrow pretty consistently, Von Miller and those guys. So I don't see this team as a serious threat in the AFC. If they could they steal the AFC North? Sure, they could. We see the occasional team where a star quarterback just goes off. We saw Dak do that in 2023, where he stole the division from Philly with a significantly, lesser talent than what the Eagles had. Great quarterbacks will do that all the time, but as a serious team that can win 3 straight playoff games, because they're not getting the 1 seed. That's going to be Kansas City. That's going to be Buffalo. That's going to be one of those teams. Maybe Baltimore. Do I see this team that can win 3 straight games, get to the Super Bowl again? Keep in mind, when they got to Super Bowl in 2021, it's a pretty good defense. They had a pass rush. Linebackers weren't very good, but they had some good players, in their secondary, Jesse Bates and company. So they had guys. They weren't special, but they had guys. Up front, they're still terrible on the offensive line. They may move on for their best pass rusher. Why should I be excited about the Cincinnati Bengals today? I'm not, and I think they made a big mistake. Not in paying Chase, but in paying Higgins, who's an excellent player. He's worth the money, just not for the Bengals in the situation they're in. So I think Cincinnati, for the foreseeable future, just close their championship window. It's over. For the time being, it's over. Thanks so much for watching the show on YouTube, and be sure to go click that big red subscribe button and check out the other clips and full shows from Carving It Up Live, as well as our other incredible content creators here on the Grid Network.